They tell you that pleasure is life's great reward. But what if that's just a disguise? What if the chocolate, the scrolling, the lust, the laughter are only well-dressed shadows hiding something older and more unsettling? Let me ask you, when was the last time you felt truly complete without needing anything else to fill you up? Not merely entertained, not momentarily satisfied, but deeply, almost mysteriously free of craving. Because here's the truth. We exist in an era overflowing with pleasure, yet most of us are starving inside. Carl Jung warned us long ago, the comforts we chase are often the very things that keep us from ever healing. Today, you're going to see pleasure in a way you've never dared to see it before. Let's begin. Picture this. You wake up and immediately reach for your phone. You don't know why. There's no emergency, no joy waiting on the screen. But the impulse is stronger than hunger itself. You flick through a reel that makes you smile for all of 3 seconds, and then forget it even happened. Another reel and another. Somewhere in that endless scroll, the day disappears, but the ache doesn't. You put your phone down, maybe grab something salty or sweet or both. Then the guilt creeps in. You weren't even hungry. You just needed something. But what you needed wasn't food. It wasn't dopamine. It was a moment of quiet. A pause in the endless storm you've never learned to name. Jung saw this pattern clearly. He taught that every human carries a hidden self, a shadow buried beneath distractions. And pleasure is the most tempting shovel we use to bury it. When you eat without real hunger, scroll without curiosity, or desire without love, you are not chasing joy. You're choosing anesthesia. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of what we call pleasure is simply relief. Relief from feeling ourselves. But this relief comes at a steep price. Every time you reach for the easy high, you create a deeper hunger for the thing you actually crave. When it never comes, you assume you're broken. But you're not broken. You're just unaware. Unaware that you were conditioned to mistake escape for enjoyment. Unaware that the pleasure you seek is often a symptom, not a cure. Let's go even deeper. Picture yourself at 6 years old. You're crying because something hurts. Nobody pays attention, so you learn something that sticks. Feeling bad gets you nowhere. But when you smile, perform, distract yourself, people approve. That small reward lodges itself in your nervous system, so you repeat it again and again, all the way into adulthood. Your pain becomes quiet. Your pleasures grow loud. Louder than your loneliness, louder than your unspoken fears, louder than the child inside you who just wanted to be held. But here's what most never realize. Pleasure has memory. Every time you use it to numb your pain, you teach your body to dread stillness. Stillness becomes unbearable. That's why you can't sit alone in silence. Why you blast music in the shower. Why the quiet feels like punishment. Jung understood this better than anyone. He knew that pleasure, when misused, becomes an enemy of the soul. Not because pleasure itself is evil, but because we use it to avoid the truth. And the real enemy is that avoidance. The avoidance that keeps you circling the same emptiness. Before we go further, I want you to pause. If any of this feels familiar, if you've ever felt that hollow guilt after indulging in something that should have made you happy, no, you are not alone. This isn't weakness. It's an invitation to see yourself honestly. Let me show you the trap that keeps so many of us stuck. Imagine a person trudging through an endless desert, chasing mirages. Every time they sprint toward one, it evaporates. But instead of stopping, they convince themselves the next illusion will finally be real. That is what pleasure becomes when it's unexamined. A promise that never keeps itself. And here's the irony. True pleasure, the kind that actually nourishes you, is usually quiet. It doesn't clamor for attention. It doesn't numb or distract. It expands you. Real pleasure is found in a deep conversation where you don't have to pretend. In finishing a project you thought you'd never complete. In waking up one day and realizing you no longer crave what used to control you. But we rarely hunger for that kind. Because real pleasure requires effort. It demands presence, and it doesn't deliver an instant rush, yet it's the only kind worth craving. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." Pleasure is the most beautiful absurdity we've ever invented. Let's rewind. Picture yourself as a child again. You fall and scrape your knee, it stings, and you start to cry. Someone rushes over and says, "Here, have a cookie, don't cry." Or they turn on a cartoon and say, "Look, something fun." That moment brands itself onto your nervous system, not in your conscious mind, but in the wiring of your body. You learn something without knowing it. Pain is to be covered, feeling is weakness, and pleasure is the cure. So you grow up fluent in distraction. Pleasure becomes your translator, the thing you use when you're too afraid to say, "I'm not okay." It dances when you're too tired to admit, "I'm empty." It smiles when, deep down, all you want to do is scream. But here's the part no one tells you. Every time you replace a feeling with stimulation, you lose another fragment of intimacy with yourself. Jung warned us, when the inner world is ignored, the outer world becomes louder. And what is pleasure if not the loudest force in modern life? The endless scroll, the buzzing notifications, the binge watching, they scream at you so you don't have to hear your own ache. But listen to what exactly? To this dash, the quiet longing beneath it all, the hunger for meaning, the desire to belong, the wound of feeling unseen. Pleasure is not inherently bad. In fact, it's sacred when you choose it with intention, but it turns poisonous the moment you use it to replace presence. Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever felt that subtle shame after indulging? After watching another episode you didn't even enjoy? After texting someone you knew you shouldn't? After buying something you didn't need? Eating when you weren't even hungry? That guilt doesn't mean you're immoral. It means a part of you recognizes you weren't truly fed. You were only postponing the hunger. This is where so many people misunderstand Jung. They think shadow work is about becoming edgy or darker. But that's a shallow interpretation. Shadow work is about recognizing the moments you betray yourself for a fleeting sense of relief and saying to that part of you, "I see you, and I choose truth over escape." Let's look deeper at why this cycle is so hard to break. It's not just that pleasure feels good. It's that it feels familiar. Your nervous system doesn't crave what's healthy. It craves what it knows, even if that means repeating the same hollow rituals that left you feeling empty 1,000 times before. Jung believed this was the greatest tragedy of modern life, that people are addicted not to joy but to predictability. We tell ourselves, "I deserve this," but if we were honest, we'd admit, "I just don't know what else to do with my loneliness." That's why you keep reaching for the same distractions. They become your ritual, your private religion. Think about it. How many times have you promised yourself, "This is the last time," only to find your hands moving almost automatically? The phone unlocks. The food is unwrapped. The shopping cart fills itself. Jung called this possession. The moment when an autonomous part of the psyche takes over and runs the show. It feels like you, but it isn't. It's an old fragment of you, acting out a story you never questioned. And if you don't learn to witness it without judgment, it will keep choosing for you. Because that's the hidden function of unconscious pleasure. It gives you something to do while avoiding what really matters. Here's the truth. You don't crave endless stimulation. You crave aliveness. You crave wholeness. But wholeness isn't glamorous. It doesn't deliver instant gratification. It feels awkward, even painful at first, because you must sit in the discomfort you've been trying to outrun. You must allow the hunger to be seen, and that takes courage most people never find. Jung believed that the first step toward real freedom is simply noticing the moment you reach for escape, not to shame yourself, but to pause, to ask, "What am I unwilling to feel right now?" It sounds simple, but in that question lies the power to transform your relationship with pleasure forever. Because the moment you can witness the impulse without obeying it, you create a gap. And in that gap, something miraculous happens. You remember you have a choice. You're no longer enslaved by the reflex. You become the observer rather than the actor. From this place, you don't have to demonize pleasure. You can finally approach it with clarity. Imagine this. Instead of mindlessly scrolling, you decide to read something that challenges you. Instead of eating to bury your sadness, you sit with it. Instead of running from silence, you welcome it. In this space, pleasure transforms. It stops being an addiction. It becomes a celebration. Not a way to numb your life, but a way to enrich it. That's what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most people never make it to that moment of awareness. They die believing their compulsions were just their personality. But you don't have to, because the simple act of witnessing yourself changes everything. It doesn't erase your shadows, but it shines a light on them. And light always diminishes fear. Let's be clear. This isn't about rejecting all pleasure. It's about reclaiming your power to choose it consciously. Jung never said that joy, sensuality, or delight were bad. He said they become dangerous when they are used to cover wounds you refuse to examine. When you eat because you love the taste, that is nourishment. When you eat to avoid your sadness, that is avoidance. The action looks the same from the outside, but inside, it is an entirely different experience. This is why so many people feel hollow after indulgence, because they weren't truly there. They were absent, hoping the sensation would fill the void. Real pleasure demands presence. Think about the last time you were fully immersed in something you loved. A conversation that lit you up, a creative project that pulled you into flow, a walk where you felt connected to the world around you. That is the pleasure that renews you. But if you've spent years using superficial stimulation to avoid pain, you'll have to retrain yourself to even recognize that deeper joy. It starts small. The next time you feel the pull to distract yourself, pause. Ask yourself, what am I hoping this will solve? Most of the time, you'll hear silence in response. Don't turn away from that silence. That emptiness is your invitation to go deeper. Jung believed that behind every compulsion is a neglected truth, a part of you that needed attention decades ago but never got it. Pleasure isn't the problem, it's the disguise. And the moment you remove that disguise, you begin to understand your own story. Let's take this further. Imagine your cravings as messengers. They are not enemies trying to sabotage you. They are signals pointing to the exact place you need to heal. That is the paradox Jung taught. What you most want to avoid holds the key to your liberation. But facing it isn't comfortable. It will feel like loss at first, like stepping out of a familiar pattern that gave you a false sense of safety. But that discomfort is the first sign of real freedom. Because once you stop needing pleasure to survive, you finally get to choose when and how you enjoy it. Imagine that. You eat the dessert because it tastes good, not because you're hiding from yourself. You watch the movie because you're present, not because you're escaping. You rest because you're honoring your energy, not because you're too depleted to function. This is the essence of Jung's teaching. Pleasure is sacred when it grows out of awareness. It is destructive when it grows out of avoidance. Modern culture won't teach you this. It profits too much from your distraction. It wants you addicted to shallow highs so you never look underneath. But you can make a different choice. The first step is remembering every time you reach for something to soothe you, you have an opportunity to pause, breathe, and ask, what am I really needing? Most people will never do this. But if you do, you'll discover something astonishing. Your capacity for joy is infinitely bigger than the tiny bursts of pleasure you've been settling for. And once you taste that deeper joy, the old patterns start to lose their grip. Let's finish with the hardest, most liberating truth of all. You cannot become whole without first surrendering your addiction to comfort. Carl Jung believed the modern person suffers not from too little pleasure, but from too much of the wrong kind. He wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. We fill our days with trivialities, scrolling, buying, gossiping, numbing, not because we are shallow, but because we are terrified. Terrified of what might surface if we ever sat still long enough to feel it. This is why the simplest practices are often the most powerful. To sit alone in a quiet room, to eat slowly without distraction, to spend a day without the internet. These things feel almost impossible. But that is precisely why they matter. Because in that space, you start to notice the parts of yourself you've been neglecting. The part that never felt good enough. The part that aches for belonging. The part that still remembers every time you were dismissed or ignored. And yes, facing these truths will hurt, but they will hurt far less than a lifetime of unfulfilling pleasure. Once you see this clearly, your relationship with desire begins to transform. You stop asking, "What will make me feel good right now?" And you start asking, "What will make me whole in the long run?" That question is the doorway out of compulsion. It doesn't mean you'll never enjoy simple pleasures again. It means you'll finally enjoy them without guilt or dependence, because you'll know you can live without them. Jung taught that the soul's greatest hunger isn't for comfort, it's for meaning. And meaning is born in the exact place you least want to look. In the darkness, you keep trying to escape. When you turn toward that darkness, something paradoxical happens. You find light, not the flickering glow of distraction, but the steady fire of awareness. This fire doesn't burn you, it warms you. It illuminates your compulsions so you can see them for what they are. Habits you adopted when you didn't know any better. But you know better now, and no one gives you a choice. When you choose presence over avoidance, you reclaim your sovereignty. Pleasure stops being your master. It becomes your ally. You can savor a glass of wine, a meal, a movie, because you no longer need them to hide from yourself. You've made peace with the silence you once feared, and that peace is worth more than any passing thrill. This is the ultimate lesson Jung left for us. Until you learn to hold your own emptiness, you will keep trying to fill it with what can never satisfy. The next time you feel that familiar pull, the craving to escape, to distract, to numb, pause, just for a breath, and ask yourself with honest curiosity, what part of me is asking to be felt instead of avoided? In that moment, you are no longer unconscious. You are awake, and an awake person is impossible to control, because they no longer chase comfort at any cost. They choose it when it serves them, and they let it go when it doesn't. That is real freedom. If this video spoke to something inside you, share it with someone who might need to hear these words. And remember, the life you want isn't waiting behind more pleasure. It's waiting in the simple, courageous act of finally coming home to yourself.